over. There was a French doctor, Vietnamese French doctor, and I remember vividly, he says, "Kirk, you're very badly injured, you'll probably die." And did nothing. They just tied me back up. Then the fun began. They put me in a room and left me lying on a stretcher, bound, gagged, and blindfolded for, I think, 3 days. I'm not absolutely certain, but I believe it was 3 days. They'd come in and give me a little water. That's all I had for 3 days. Then on the 4th morning, they took me in a room, and I couldn't walk for nearly 3 months from the injection. They set me up on the floor with an old milk crate or a box behind my back. And I'll never forget the first words out of the fellow's mouth. Says, "Kirk, you are not a prisoner of war. You are a war criminal. You've committed crimes against the Vietnamese people. You'll be tried and most probably shot. And now you'll answer all of our questions." Now, all of you know, I suppose, that the military, all services have a code of conduct. You give name, rank, serial number, and date of birth to the best of your ability. Well, they started asking me questions such as, what was I flying? What were my targets? What are the tactics? I wouldn't answer anything. Well, they kept going on. They didn't seem to get very excited. And when I wouldn't give them anything but name, rank, serial number, date of birth, the senior guy sitting there says, "Kirk, you're very stupid. It's going to be very difficult for you here." And he got up and left. And I thought, well, this is not too bad. I can endure this. Pretty soon the door opened, and the biggest fellow I ever saw in Vietnam, and we came to know him as Big Ugly, and Big Ug was a torture expert. And I want to make a couple of points here to you. To my knowledge, 590 people were prisoners of war in North Vietnam. 586 came home. The others died in captivity. But every person that I know of was subjected to the same type of torture. What they did, we call it the rope trick. They took a rope about the size of my little finger, they wrapped it around your arm above the elbow 3 or 4 times, run it around your back, this arm, pull your elbows together so they're touching the back, then run it under your feet, tie your ankles up, pull your ankles up behind you and leave you lying on the floor, and then they'd run it around your neck. Well, I'm telling you, it hurt, but it did not hurt so bad in the first 5 minutes. But the very interesting part was that time was your enemy in that situation. And I was left lying there blindfolded, gagged and all tied up like this. And I thought to myself, human beings don't do this to other human beings. And there we were. And I don't know how much time went by, but they came in sometime later, and they never asked a question or said a word until they untied us. They untied us and set you back up and said, "Now you're ready to answer my questions." And I don't know you, but I promise you I am nothing special. I was just one person who was on the wheel of fortune and got shot down. But I said, "No, I will not answer the questions." They tied me back up, and without belaboring this, I endured 3 days and 3 nights of this torture. And on the 4th morning, when they came in and untied me, I had absolutely lost it. I could not move my arms. I lost total circulation in my arms, and I really wanted to die. And I broke. I have no idea to this day what I said to them or what I answered, but I failed. And to my knowledge, every single person up there gave something to the Vietnamese under this torture. It's not an element of do you want to. The human spirit, the will to survive, will override logic. We believe that now. And I sat on the board at the Pentagon when I came home to try to change the code of conduct. And it's very important, the element of time, because if I were to take a gun and put it to any one of your head right here and say, "Tell me what I want to know, I'll kill you." If you got what men weigh big enough to die, bang, it's all over. You no suffer. But the time element was that, well, guess what? After I broke, for the first time, they untied me, put me in a cell. And if you picture, well, a masonry building, just like a federal penitentiary, cells about 6 feet by 7 feet. No windows, or if they did have one, it's very high. A big wooden door with a small little opening that a guard could open from the outside and look in. 2 concrete bunks side by side with about that much space between the bunks, and stocks of leg irons at the end of the bunks. That was my home for 5.5 years. Once back in that cell, can you understand why I wanted to die? My whole life had been taken away from me. I was a young 38-year-old lieutenant colonel at the top of my game, and 30 seconds later, I'm floating down in that parachute blind, knowing I'm a prisoner of war. And then to have gone through this torture and it failed. I wanted to die. I had failed my country, I had failed my Air Force, and I had failed myself. And it was the most awesome experience in my entire life. And several days went by before I could realize, wait a minute, I'm here. There's not one thing I can do about this. Nobody cares about me. I've got to dig deep and find out what's inside, and I can make this. And to my knowledge, everyone who came home had to go through that, the denial, why me? It couldn't happen, and it did, and we able to. Once I was able to make that commitment, internal commitment that I'm going to do this my best and give it, I'll make it home, we made it. Without belaboring that, for food, they came in and gave us a little bowl of soup twice a day and a piece of bread. You see me now weighing about 170 pounds. I got down to 90 pounds. And the soup was 6 months of the year was cabbage soup, and 6 months of the year was pumpkin soup. Because they didn't have refrigeration, it was easy to keep that, and that's what they fed us. We were not allowed outside of the cells. We had nothing to read, nothing to write, nothing to do but sit there. And the Vietnamese used to say to contemplate your crimes. They had a loudspeaker in each little cell, and for 2 or 3 hours a day, they would tell us all the war news, the Vietnamese side of all the war news. We were not allowed to do anything. We were not allowed to see or be with anybody outside of your cell. After the first 28 days, one night they walked me out, and I was beginning to come back to life, I call it, and they put me in a cell with 3 other guys. 4 of us in the same cell, where we stayed living, just like I mentioned, for 14 months. And then, I'll never forget, I was very sick, and they took me out one day to dump my toilet bucket, which was like a 5-gallon paint can. In each cell was your toilet. He'd take you out once a day and dump it. So they were taking me out and walking down the hall of the cell block, and I'm really sick. And the guard was hitting me over the head with his keys, and blood starts to run down in front of my mind, in front of my face. I turn around and I hit the guard, and you just don't do that in prison camp. The bottom line was they put me in solitary confinement where I stayed for 2 years. I never saw another American except the guards. I never saw another American for 2 years, and nothing to do but read and write. And I could write a book about what you must come to grips with and what you have to do to survive just being by yourself with nothing, how you have to dig internally. Now let's think a moment. I said I was down in October of 1967, and we were released in January of 1973. I was in October 67. We had slogans. We all thought every time they gave us a banana, we were coming home. It was Golden Gate in 68, across the line in 69, 7-zip will be a pip, home for fun in 71. I just went through 4 years, and there we sat. Then on Christmas Eve of 1970, some of you old enough may know the American Special Forces made a helicopter raid into a prison camp 30 miles outside of Hanoi, trying to bring out some POWs in October of 1970. The raid was 100% successful. Everybody got out, but there were no prisoners. They moved all the prisoners of war out of that camp about 3 weeks before the raid. We don't know, but we think that maybe the Vietnamese thought they'd try it again. So there were 6 outlying prison camps out in the jungle and inside Hanoi and other areas, and they moved everyone into the big Hoa Lo prison, it was called, which was a big, like a federal penitentiary built for the French in the 30s, and that's where I'd been the entire war. And on Christmas night of 1970, they moved all the Americans into 7 big cells, and my cell had 44 people in it, and it was in that cell that I was with Admiral Stockdale, who was Ross Perot's running mate when he ran for the president. John McCain was in there, a number of jet aces, and most of our senior officers were there. And that, if you can imagine, no one slept for 24 to 48 hours. We hadn't seen anybody. I'm coming out of 2 years of solitary confinement. Suddenly, I'm in a room a bit smaller than this tent with 44 people. God, we were hugging and everything. We were so happy to see anybody. And we stayed there, with some exceptions, for about 3 months in 7 of these cells, with about 45 people a cell. And then we had church. We started having church every Sunday, and they didn't want us to have church. So they started the second Sunday. They'd take 2 senior officers out each Sunday, and we ignore them. And next Sunday we'd have church again. And after about 2 months, I was the next senior officer, and I was back out in a 2-man cell where I stayed till the end of the war. The torture basically was at the initial part of the thing, except during the entire war, the entire period there, they would have programs. They would want us to write anti-war papers. They want us to make tapes. They want us to read the news and so forth. And I flat refused to do that. And the torture for that was being locked in shackles, or what I told you, stocks at the end of the bunks. They'd lock you and leave you a week at a time until you made a tape. Or if you said no and stood it up, you wouldn't make the tape. And there were also periodic beatings. They would take us out with propaganda, just absolute ridiculous propaganda. And they would literally lean you over a table and just beat you till your fanny was raw. And there were traveling irons, we call them. Sometimes they'd put you in. But I never saw any what you call fiendish torture, taking out fingernails in an entire time. The Vietnamese had been trained by the Chinese how to do these things. And what I told you, the torture part, was essentially in the beginning trying to get military information. And it didn't work on most of us, and so they would keep bringing new people in every week or so. We'd get a couple of 2 or 3 more people. So I would be old hat. I'd been there several months. I didn't know anything. They would go after the new guys all the time. Let me close this part of the thing by saying this. All of us up there were educated people. I say that if you're going to be an aviator, you at least are going to have some college, and we were a little more sophisticated. I say that than some of the 18-year-old airmen right out of high school. We weren't so smart, but we understood at least the love of this country and what we were doing, and why we were in the war, and why we had to stand strong and stand up for what we believed was right. And the war ended on the 23rd of January of 1973 with an agreement between Henry Kissinger and the Vietnamese. And they came around the very next day. The camp commander came and let us all outside and told us the war was over and soon we'd go home. And we came home in 4 different groups, about 2 weeks apart. And I came home on March the 14th, which was almost exactly 5 years and 6 months after I was shot down. And I would like to not dwell any more about the prison experience, but I want to tell you why it means so much to me, and why after almost 40 years I still tell this story. It's a human interest story of people just like you who were put in a situation where you had to make it. There was no, what do? Die? We Americans, we believe so much in individual strength and courage that every one of you there would have probably done a lot better than I did. But we made it, and the lessons learned are first and foremost this. I don't want to get in religion, but faith. First thing was faith in God. Faith. Second thing was faith in the United States. There was never a shred of doubt from day one we were coming home. You were going to bring us home. Faith in your fellow man, the guy in the next cell. We had a tap code. We used to tap through the cell because we couldn't be with anybody. And I would never want to let down the guy in the next cell. I knew he may have been taken out and tortured, but when I go through the wall and tap, God bless you, we love you, we know you did your best. I learned the value of faith in your fellow man. I also understand our legal system. I don't particularly like the way it's going right now, but the fact that you have rights in this country to defend yourself in almost any situation. Day after day after day, I'm accused of things in the prison camp, and I'm tortured for things that I just can't tell them and can't answer, and nobody cares. Nobody ever cared anything about me because this is war. They were fighting for their survival in their mind. And the last thing I thought is the idea of the human spirit, and what I challenge you, every one of you, with in here. And that is, in the morning, guys, when you get up and shave, I want you to look in the mirror. And ladies, when you put on your makeup, look in the mirror and ask yourself a very simple question. How am I doing? I'm not talking about ego. I'm talking about how you're doing as an American citizen, how you're doing as a parent, a grandparent, a child, or whatever. And you know what? If you like the answer, I love you. I'm thrilled for you. But if you don't like the answer, face up to something facing our country right now is terrible. Nobody, but nobody in your life can change you or fix you but you. And that's the most primary lesson I learned. The guy in the next cell couldn't do anything for me. I had to make it, and I had to look into it and try to do my best. And I challenge you to do that, because none of us are ever going to make big changes in our life. But in closing this aspect, instead of being a terrible thing in my life, as it certainly was, it's probably the most meaningful thing that ever happened to me in my life, because I clearly understand the difference between the ants and elephants in life. I think I'm a better parent. I think I'm a better grandfather. I think I'm a better husband than I would have had it not been there. And so I ask you to do these things, and each day, when you look in the mirror and say, don't try to make big changes, it won't happen. Just try to be that little bit better, and we'll all be better in this great country. Thank you, and thank you for the